So welcome everyone to, what is this called? MC squared, and it's May 3rd. Holy cow. And hopefully wherever you are, you're really starting to see the seasonal changes. We are having spring rain. Finally, we're getting more snow up in the mountains, but we are definitely seeing the rain here in Colorado. So this is very, very exciting for us. And, this month I've been thinking about this topic a lot, the topic of grief. And I think it's appropriate that we begin to talk about this as we go into spring in Northern Hemisphere and as you go into the fall, as you begin to shed things as well in the Southern Hemisphere, to begin to tap into this topic that a lot of us don't get a chance to talk about or have the space to discuss it or feel safe enough to even talk about it or to be understood. But one of the most important things about grief is that, number one, we all grieve. I mean, humans grieve. All animals grieve. All sentient beings. Okay, so in order to be on this earth, and if you want to experience love, which all of us do, we are always going to have to go through some grieving process. So even though you can choose not to grieve, I think it's a choice you could make, but it will be very difficult to be on this earth and to experience love. So that's number one. And none of us will get through this life without having, multiple times that we will feel like we want to just collapse onto the floor and feel like nothing can get through. It feels like it's just going to last forever. And we could call that grieving. So I think it's important that we talk about this, we share the space together, and what a good time to do this, right? Because we've all been through as collective grieving. Whether you had your family members die or you might have even gone through some really hard times in the last year, we know as collective, globally, we've gone through grieving. And I think we can't put a time limit on this because it's very personal, and also collectively, we don't know what this is going to have an impact on our systems. And I always think of children too, like the kids that couldn't go back to school for a year and they didn't get to go through graduations or even, the entering into the first grade or even starting college or dormitory lifestyles. Like I knew several of my clients' kids had to come home after they entered into the university. They ended up closing, so they had to come back after they decorated their dorm room for the first time, So there's just many layers of grieving. That's just one example that we're going through. So, and one thing that I want all of you to keep in mind and keep the space for is that we're not here to compete with each other's grief, okay? Competition gets nowhere. Competition would lose if we start to compete with who had it tougher than me, or, oh, I didn't have it as tough as somebody else. That's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to really tune in and tap into the feelings that all humans are here to experience, and to honor that, to have the space to do that, because I feel like we haven't been able to do that as a collective either, behind masks and social distancing and constant these kind of video things. It's really hard to collapse and then begin to cry in this kind of situations, and then we feel really vulnerable. But even, let's say if that happens to you, as we go deeper into this topic together, honor that. And if you witness that in others, just hold the space for that person. And maybe Chris has a couple more things to say, but I just wanted to say this is what it is to be human beings and all living things on this earth, and no competition. And I work with, over the years, 20 years of working with clients, some of the people that I've worked with would say, oh, but mine isn't as bad as, X, Y, and Z. And I really encourage you to stop doing that. Okay. It's like, I don't care. The fact is you're grieving. Because if you were to work with a 4-year-old, just lost I remember my sister just grieving over a little goldfish. Okay. She grieved over that little thing. And she was so sad. And I remember she was about 4 years old. And she was just like, for days, she was just crying about it. And we made the little, grave for the little goldfish outside. And it was important to her. And so who are we to say, oh, that is nothing. Let me tell you, like you wouldn't do that to a little 4-year-old that's crying over her little goldfish. So let's hold that space for one another. So I will pause here for a moment and maybe Chris has something to share.
Well, for starters, I just wanted to say that we grieve because we love. And that's an important thing for everyone to acknowledge. So an acknowledgement is a big part of what is really important right now. I'm seeing this a lot in my own work, that many people are becoming stuck or frustrated or are starting to get into a cycle of suffering because of an inability either to acknowledge for themselves what has been happening for them, especially over the past year to 15 months, but also to acknowledge what's different. And that's something that we wanted to involve all of you in talking about. And we'll do this in just a minute here, but we wanted to have you just join in this conversation through the chat and share with us what are some of the things that you might be grieving for. And Masami, the email that went out to announce the topic for today, it talked about how grief and loss are very closely connected. And so you could be grieving for things that you might not have even thought about yet. Losses that have happened that you might have just pushed back. And maybe you've said to yourself, well, I'll deal with it later when I have the emotional capacity, or when I have the headspace, or when life seems less chaotic. Unfortunately, we don't operate in such a neatly compartmentalized and packaged way. A lot of these things are just going to bleed over each other. And so I want you to just think about that for a moment. And before we start opening up the chat to that, I think maybe what we should do is just take a moment here. It might seem like an awkward break, I hope not, but this is a good chance for us just to talk about the course that Masami is offering, which actually starts this week. And so I wanted to make sure she had a minute to share that before we get into this topic, because I have a feeling this topic will carry us all the way to the end of this hour very easily and beyond.
Well, thanks, Chris. I wasn't going to talk about my course yet or anything, but I think I'm glad you brought it up, because I started thinking about the course I'm starting this week. It's called the Weight Loss Resistance and the Alchemy of Receiving and Releasing. And that's what kind of started thinking about this topic of the grief and the losses and sadness also, because as many of you know, that I am not really that interested in teaching you a quick weight loss program, because that is not how life works. And I always tell people, my clients, that the weight loss is the side effects, or the outcome of you coming back to homeostasis, coming back to balance. That's when you will experience shedding. And so the course that I'm creating, you can take it because you feel like you need to work on your weight. But if you're solely thinking that this course is going to help me to lose 20 pounds that I need to, or whatever, then probably I would say to you, don't take my course. There are plenty of weight loss programs out there that you can just do a crash course on something and you will lose what you need to. But that's not what I'm interested in, because what I'm interested in is, where are you blocked? Why are you not receiving? And why you're not releasing? That's what I'm interested in. And it's so much more than just the physiological saboteurs, like, what are you eating? When are you eating? But it's like, I'm an emotional eater. I used to be much more than now. Chris will see it and he will be like, oh, are you eating because you're angry at your mother by any chance? And, I would do that. So I know. And I'll just give you a quick background that came about, that it's connected to this topic of grief. Is when I left Japan when I was not quite 16, I was preparing for high school examinations, and high school exam is really important in Japan. That sets the stage for what your life is going to look like. So it's a very, very difficult exam to take. And so for months, I mean, for years, but I was preparing for this. And I was aiming to go to one of the best high schools in the country. So it was a really tough times. And then I remember my mom, actually it was my dad. I had not seen my dad I hadn't seen him much because he was working so much. But he came into my room and said, hey, you may want to begin to review your English textbooks, because you're going to be moving to the United States in 3 months. And I was in total shock. And what happened was, after that, there's so much that I lost by having to move. And I didn't move with the whole family, right? I just moved to Minnesota and then lived with some random foster homes. So that's traumatizing enough. But what happened was, after that announcement, I gained I would say I gained close to like 7 kilos. So that's a lot on my body. Like, that's like 15, 16 pounds. Okay. And then I moved to the US, and then I basically became an emotional eater at night. So my foster home families will go to bed, and around like 2 in the morning, I get out of my bed and I go downstairs and I'll eat like candy bars and ice creams and cakes. And I literally would eat these sugar things just to feel sweetness, just to feel like I'm being comforted. And I really gained a lot of weight in that short period of time. And I remember I came back to Japan about a year and 3 months after being in US. And I went to visit my aunt, and she just looked at me and she's like, oh my God, you're so fat. I mean, that's kind of how a lot of the Asian women speak to each other, just so you know. They're straightforward. They don't cover it up. So what she did was, she said, I know you love strawberry shortcake. I know that's your favorite cake. So we're going to go buy it, but we're going to look at it, and we're going to take only 3 bites, and you're going to control yourself. And so that's like, I had to do this control thing with my aunt for the visit that I had with her. And later on, I learned that it's nothing to do with the willpower, really. The pounds that we put on has nothing to do with your own willpower, how many little bites of strawberry shortcake you can eat. But I was grieving because I lost so much from moving from my home. And still to this day, Japan is my home. That is my language that I feel most connected to. I lost everything I knew, and I moved here. So I still grieve about it. And the reason why I said to Chris, I said, I got to talk about this, is we took a break and went for like 3 nights in New Mexico to visit some hot springs. And we were at this first hot springs. And then Chris said to me, hey, do you see that lady reading a Japanese book? And I said, oh my gosh, there's a Japanese lady. I got to go talk to her. So I go into the hot springs and I go near her and said, well, hello. And I started saying in Japanese, and she just looks at me, and then almost everyone is shocked because I don't look Japanese. They're like, so she said, are you Japanese? And so I said, yes, I am. And I grew up there and I have to explain my whole history. So they know that I'm Japanese. Okay. So I do that bit at first. And then we started talking. And then what we realized was that she moved to the US about 28 years ago after Kobe is it was an old city in Japan. I mean, every city in Japan is old, but Kobe was a very internationally known, beautiful city. And they went through terrible earthquakes, terrible, like 8 point something. So pretty much destroyed this whole city, beautiful city in the early 1990s. And so she moved soon after that. So then I shared that my hometown got struck by 2 earthquakes and we lost our home and dad died in it. And then our castles crumbled and it was just this terrible scene. And so we just kind of shared each other's natural disaster moment. And then we started talking about how we don't ever meet anybody from Japan and we don't speak our own language. And that moment, it's like it didn't matter where she came, what we've experienced, just like we found each other and we heard each other. And it was just a beautiful time we shared together. And we sensed our inner loss that it will never be fulfilled. And we talked about it. We said, we can't keep up with the new music in Japan anymore. We can't keep up with their culture, like a new pop culture anymore. So there's a big hole inside us that will never be fulfilled. And we talked about that. And she's like, I'm so glad we could talk about this even for a short period of time because I needed to. And then we said goodbye. And then we went to another hot springs and there was this Japanese American. He was born and raised here, so he didn't speak Japanese, but we just started talking. And then he started sharing and he started to share more. And I'm one of those people that people will share their life stories in the grocery store. I'm just that person and I'm good with it. I listen in. I want to hear because you know how much I love people's stories. And he started to share that his mother was from Hiroshima and that she lost her entire family. And she finally found her brother in the wreckage. And when she reached out to him to pull his hand up to get him out of there, his entire skin came off of him. And so he was sharing this, and his mother is like 96. And he had tears coming down. And then he started to share all this pain and suffering that even though he never grew up in Japan. I said, yeah, you mean it's in your cells? Is it in your body? He goes, yeah, there's so much trauma. I don't even know how to work with it. And, it was just, he was an ex-police officer too. And so we were sharing this and he started to tell me that his father's side of family came to the US in the late 1800s, 1890s. And they bought acres, multiple acres to start farming. A lot of Japanese people came to start farming. But then all their land that they paid for got taken away when the World War II started and the US Japan went to war with the US and the US went to war with Japan. They were put into the encampment. They were put into a camp for Japanese, even though they were Americans. And he was grieving about that because he said that was our ancestors' land. And the US government never gave it back to us. And, last thing I wanted to share is that this is the month that we are going into I think Asian Pacific Islanders month or something this month. So it didn't surprise me that I kept meeting the Asian descents or something like that and their grief that they shared with me. And so I will stop there. I'm sharing this because I think it's in the air. I'm sharing this because we all want to be heard. And just because the war happened so many years ago, that doesn't mean that we don't feel it. And we live in that. If you live in anywhere on this earth, You're walking on the land that the others have shed their blood. And we also need to remember that. So I'll stop right there for a moment, Chris. So that's why I think I'm doing the weight loss course, because I need to shed my grief. And I think part of the weight is that too, that we haven't had the time and the space to share our weight. We are all being weighted down by a lot of our grief. Yeah. Chris, you have anything to share?
Unmute myself first. Yeah, I was going to say, I'll pick up there with something that I'm reminded of, which is how much so many of us are unable to work through or even feel the grief for the things that we've lost, because life moves on so fast. It just piles on and more keeps coming. And so many events that happen that are the source of grief. And a lot of the grief that many of us have is unacknowledged. So it's basically living in the cells of our bodies in some other form. And one of the things about grief, and I mean, it's funny, one of the things that Masami and I really connected over when we first met is I had not quite to the same maybe level of drama that she had for being sent alone out of a country, but my family also moved out of country at about the same age where she came to the US. So I was nearly 16 and my family moved from Denver to Toronto, Canada. And so there was a complete loss of any sort of continuity of friends and family and culture. My family was kind of broken up at that point, with siblings getting scattered. And then moving into the most multicultural part of the most multicultural city in the world, with my dad working at a church in Chinatown. And that was a shock on so many levels. And while it was a great experience overall, it wasn't until many years later that I really began to appreciate all that had been disrupted. And there's more to my personal story that I won't go into right now, but when we don't acknowledge what's happened, it's very easy to just say, oh, well, that just happened, or that's in the past now, or something to indicate that life has moved on, and so I've just rolled with it. Well, the more we do that, and we deny it, or we bottle it, or we compartmentalize it, try to shut off any emotional connection to it, the more it gnaws at us and finds ways to show up in our bodies, in our mental health, in our relationships with other people. So this is why this is such a topic of interest, and it's timely. And we wanted to just open a conversation about it. And I wanted to take a moment to just maybe read some of the things. A few of you started sharing, but if more of you would like to share something that you have experienced about just what is something that you have lost. Maybe it's been in the past year, maybe it's been something from much longer ago that you still haven't quite found that release. And one of the things about the grieving process is, one, in our modern world today, most cultures aren't very good at it anymore. Some of us never were good at it. And so we have that working against us in a certain way. But then we just have so many layers. There's so much that's coming at us all the time. And so one thing that we do know is that the ability to talk about it, even just to acknowledge it outside of yourself, is part of a healing process. And the goal isn't to get fixed. The goal isn't to remove all pain that might be associated with this grieving process. It's to be able to grow through it and to grow beyond it, beyond the stuck feelings of it. Because I think that anybody that has really profoundly experienced grief and even worked through it knows that it doesn't really go away. It's something, it's almost like a skill that you become better at, rather than something that you resolve. So I'm going to just read a few of these. I'm not going to name the names. I'm just going to read a few of these things that showed up in the chat. My deepest grief was over a doll that washed out to sea.
Chris, remember that? When my sister and I were frantically trying to find our dolls in the house after the earthquakes back in Japan. And I found the one that I was looking for, the one that I manifested when I was little. I manifested this perfect doll and I saved her. But then the next day, so I saved it thinking, okay, I got to put this in the bag. So I put her in the bag, but I forgot that it's been monsoon rain after the earthquakes. And so it was too much water, like moisture. So I put it in a plastic bag, and the next day she was covered in mold. Oh my God, that still makes me so sad that I couldn't save her because she was covered in mold the next day. Remember that?
Yeah, we were fighting the clock against aftershocks and rain coming through the roof and trying to save as much as we could before the house came down on us or something. Yeah.
Yeah, still makes me sad about that doll, actually.
Yeah.
Mm.
So just remember, everyone, that the grief that we feel, like Masami said, it's not competitive. So it really doesn't matter what the scale of your personal loss might seem to be compared to someone else's. What matters is that it happened and that it impacted you the way it did. Okay, so I'm just going to read some more of these. This is what we're grieving as a collective group here. My daughter, who killed herself 4 years ago this summer.
Just pause for a moment. Can we all pause for her, please? Just pause, just witness it for her. She's grieving. She's grieving. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Next one. I feel a loss of innocence of the way things were and how safe I thought I was and how I know it was a delusion. Yeah, just feel that one for a moment. So much of the loss that we feel is just that. It's the sense of safety that we believed we had. The next one. The statement that stopped me in my tracks from emotional eating was my daughter's statement to me, "You're eating your emotions." When I realized what that actually implied, I stopped right away. And even though there are times I still move to that, I hear that in my head and then stop, because those are emotions I want to move out of my body, not put back in.
Very good observations. I love that.
Okay, the next one. The loss of intimate connection with family and close friends due to the denial of deep transgenerational pain, and even the willingness to acknowledge the shadow, the pain of being shamed and alienated for being the one who grieves the loss of what truly matters, our own souls, as no one is willing to truly listen. So maybe you're somebody like this also who's felt alone in this time.
Yeah.
And maybe alone and without a voice.
We hear you. We hear you. We're listening.
Yeah, and I'm just going to keep reading these for a few more minutes. So,
Mm.
the next one. I gained 90 pounds in 90 days as I whistle blew against the juvenile justice system. I think the grief that they would threaten my life and try to fire me instead of treat children humanely. So, for anybody who's ever felt small up against the system of institutions and much bigger processes, that can be a very crushing experience. Okay. I'm going to go to another one. I've been working through a lot of ancestral grief too, fleeing Latvia from the Russians after World War II. It's a blessing to process this because few people slow down enough to feel. That's such an important statement there, that few people slow down enough to feel. And what we know about grief and trauma and loss is that if we don't feel, we don't heal.
Yeah, that's why the word emotion has the word motion in it. You have to move into that emotion and really feel it. But most of us don't live in a culture that would allow that time.
Okay, so I'm going to read a few more of these. I haven't fully grieved the deaths, one expected, one sudden, of my two deepest beloveds. The next one, did you want to say something?
It's just the word sudden is the tough one. Sudden ones are tough. Anticipatory grief is there too. Like, we all experience anticipatory grief, which we'll talk about this month more, but these sudden ones, you just can't prepare yourself. It's a tough one. Yeah.
Well, and like the earlier comment, so much of what causes the grief is when circumstances rip us away from the life that we expected, the life that we anticipated and thought we would have. The next one, I lost ever having a family. All I ever wanted, and no one wanted to be a family, so they were gone by the time I was 4, leaving me alone in the home to care for myself and a baby brother at 4. And so many of us are still living through our childhood experiences, and we need to acknowledge that too. The next one, my grandpa was in Topaz camp. Never told anyone. Family never talked about it, leaving a big hole that I'm still trying to fill with food, stimulation that gets me out of my body, and a hunger for heart connection. And again, thank you everyone for sharing these. There are so many coming in, and I don't know if we'll get to all of them today, but thank you for sharing.
Let's keep reading.
We'll keep sharing some.
Let's keep reading because this is what we need.
Yeah, maybe that's what is needed for today mainly. The next one, my deepest, earliest grief came from my mother not wanting me. My mother not wanting me. Just taking a moment to let these land between.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next one, grief now for the world that is so divided. In a real, true situation that has caused so much grief is being used to convince us there is only one way to be a caring person. And anyone who does not obey is demonized, judged, ostracized, even if they are careful and considerate in other ways. This has been the state of the world for a long time. But now does the people who once stood up for the rights of choice, inclusion, questioning, who are now judging, demonizing, excluding. That is especially heartbreaking. And I think there are many of us who feel that we're being polarized by what is the right way to respond to what's happening in the world right now. As if there is one and only one right way. I think there are many of us that have been feeling that.
Well, and then Harpinder says, I feel grief is complicated, and that summarizes it really, what you're saying. And I wrote on my email to everyone that grief is messy. It's really messy, and it's very individual too. And I remember when my dad was in the coma, my sister would cry, and she would kind of look at me because I wasn't crying, because I didn't need to grieve by crying. I just didn't need to do that. But it feels like there's like a right way to grieve. And if you're not crying, or if you're not this or that, then you get judged too. Anger is grief. My brother went into total anger, rage when this was happening too. But it was his way of grieving. Anxiety can be grieving, and there are many stages of grief, but you don't need to follow it. Grieving is not a linear thing. You will move through it, but and then you will move forward with your grieving, but you don't move on from grieving, from losses ever. Especially, I lived with this couple that lost their only daughter in a car accident in the middle of the winter. And they never moved on. That wasn't what they needed to do. They moved forward with it. There was a movement with it. And, that couple really taught me to be able to communicate with different dimensions, because they allowed me to be okay that I can speak to different elements, different areas, that even though they've passed on from this earth, I get to communicate with them. So move with it. That's what grieving requires, is the movement. So don't get stagnant, and don't judge yourself if you're feeling angry from the loss right now. It's okay.
Yeah, that's something we have to remember, is that it's grief is so personal, and that how we express it is going to be a unique expression to us individually. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. So I'm going to read a few more of these. I grieved more when I thought the world was returning to normal 2 months ago. I didn't want it how it was. I wanted it the more mindful way. I went into deep grief. I think many of us can relate to that, not wanting it how it actually was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The next one, lots of loss this year. Been cleaning out mom's home and recognized more loss, never able to take time or allowed. My mother had kept so much and had not dealt with any of it. Generations of loss, finding the death certificates, but never had closure as a child or even as an adult.
Mm.
The next one, many of my father's ancestors were strong leaders of the indigenous peoples of part of this country. This country did so many things to take away the land, the culture, the freedom, the power, and the innocence of the area. They contaminated the land, the waters, the air, and prohibited my ancestors from being able to practice our spiritual practices. It has taken us a very long time to gain some rights back, but this country still remains in ultimate control of our lands. And as difficult as it is to hear all these, I just want to thank everyone again for sitting with this. We don't do this much in our world. Just hear other people and let other people share. So
and to just to share, and just to be heard, and not to say, I'm sorry for your loss kind of a thing. You know, I can't, I mean, I'm sure many of you felt like, oh, please, no, not I'm sorry for your loss again. Like, please, no. Why don't you ask me if I want to have a little vegetable soup that you can bring for me? Like something else. So we're not here sharing this so that we can say sorry for your loss. We just need to be witnessed for what we've gone through, all of us.
Yeah, this is a chance to really feel what empathy is, because by listening and letting it stir up whatever feeling stirs up for us, we're able to participate in this, and that makes all of us better humans. So if we can just sit with this is it feels like a lot, and just I'm hoping that it will also remind everyone you're not alone in whatever your experience is. That everyone here on this call is experiencing their own sense of loss and grief and challenge. So next one, I was my husband's care provider while he declined from kidney cancer. I can agree with you when you say that you have loved deeply, that when you have loved deeply, you grieve deeply. It's been 2 years since he passed, and at first I felt very reluctant about becoming involved with anyone else because I was afraid that I would end up falling in love and being hurt again. I'm not so fearful anymore. Good to hear.
Yeah.
The next one, I lost both of my parents. I wasn't near them into their last moments as I live abroad. My younger sister had to deal with all funeral arrangements as I was away. When my mom suddenly passed away, I was due to give birth to my baby boy. I wasn't able to give love to him and grief at the same time. My son hasn't smiled due to me being so sad. The next one. My deepest grief is around misunderstanding and not fully accepting nor unconditionally loving my misunderstood father. He's gone now. I ask for his forgiveness, and I know he has. My unforgiveness of myself still lingers, and I pray I will fully forgive myself sooner than later for true embodied healing. And how many of us hold regrets about things unsaid? The next one, my older brother died a few months ago, and I couldn't travel to see him while he was still alive, or be with the rest of the family through the funeral, or grieve with us all together. Next one. My earliest grief was I never bonded with my mother, since she had to stay in the hospital and I was brought home and didn't see her until I was 3 months old. The next one. Sorrow for the loss of feeling safe in my body from multiple experiences in childhood. One in particular, a drowning experience in adolescence, and another frequent molestation from an uncle living in the same house. And I'm just going to say it again. I thank all of you. We thank you for sharing these things in a public way, because it takes a lot of courage to put words to these things. But the words are also vehicles for our emotions, and they allow these things to move in us and to move through us and out of us.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, I'm going to just read that quote that I wrote in on the email too, but from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. she says, you must get it out. Grief must be witnessed to be healed. Grief shared is grief abated. Tell your tale because it reinforces that your loss mattered. In sharing our story, we dissipate the pain little by little, giving a small drop to those we meet to disperse it along the way. So that's what we're doing.
So just everyone take a slow breath right now. Okay. We're feeling this. The ask here is not for you to hold this beyond today, just to bear it. Okay, we're bearing witness. That's what that means. We are withstanding this pain and the feelings of loss that others are expressing. Okay, but we don't have to add it on top of anything that we're carrying beyond now. So just take a breath and slowly in through your nose and exhale through your nose again. And just feel that it's okay to keep that moving. Okay.
And keep a slight smile on your face right now, everyone, when you breathe. Just a slight smile as you exhale. Yeah. That'll relax the frontal lobe of your brain. It's going to start to relax the back of your brainstem area too when you just keep a little smile. And then we can come back and we can listen. Okay.
And I want to just say that for those of you listening to this now or recorded, it's an indication of the fact that this is such a prominent topic for all of us that we have more chat activity than we ever see on these calls when we maybe keep it a little lighter and bantery and that sort of thing. And we wanted to just start with this acknowledgement today,
And
so that as we unpack this topic, gradually over this month and these Mondays, it just has that realness to it. This is so real for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I'm gonna go.
we will continue to unpack this throughout the whole month and give you some kind of tools and more sharing. But I think the most important thing is that we share and we listen. But like Chris said, listen in for this moment and then release with your exhale. After this call, you must all ground yourself, okay? One way or the other, maybe go outside, take your socks off, shoes off, ground yourself, release, and ask the Mother Earth, Mother God, Mother Gaia to help you to release some of this. Because us sensitives and very caring people, we're going to take on some of this. So make sure to do that after, all right?
Okay, so let's do a few more of these, and then
Yeah.
I know I can see from the number of unread messages in my chat that we're not going to be able to get all of them, but we'll take some more. Okay, the next one is, I feel that if I allow my grief to express itself, I will drown in it like a riptide that will carry me away.
And that's something we will definitely talk about this month, because that's a very common feeling. Like if you just let it open, it's like a dam that you just removed one brick and it just coming crashing down, and you would feel like you could never come out of it. The fact is, that's not true. But it's okay to feel that way right now. Okay. But the only way to really move through grief is through motion, through feeling it. And know that all of us are equipped to be able to grieve. We're all equipped. It's in our DNA, all of us. But I understand that you will feel like you'll drown in it. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a very, very common and normal feeling to have. I just had a meeting this morning, and this was a big theme about how people in positions of leadership can acknowledge all of the pain and loss that's been going on in people in the past year. And that part of the fear is that if we start to open it, will the floodgates break? And will we be overwhelmed and not be able to call it back? Well, that's a real fear. It is a possibility that things that we don't expect or couldn't predict might happen. But some of those things that we can't predict also are part of the healing process. So not knowing, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
I was going to say not having all of the answers is what our mind is fighting, but almost by definition, we can't have all those answers.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to read just a few more of these. The next one is my mom didn't want to have another child. My father wanted her to. She was on bed rest with pregnancy with me, severe postpartum depression, and couldn't hold me. My grandmother moved in to take care of me. An eating disorder when I was 12 and put on antidepressants, still working on getting off them. Husband passed 10 years ago and just grieved it about a year and a half ago. A lot of grief around not becoming what I could have because I continued to sabotage myself. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to skip a couple down here. I'm grieving the loss of both of my parents and that they suffered so much and I couldn't help them, and how scared I knew they were. Grieving for the loss of 3 of my fur babies. We have to include the pets. The loves of my life. Grieving the loss of my fun-loving personality, my joy for life, my health and vitality, and the dreams I once had that I lost the desire to fulfill. I grieve the abuse of all people, animals, Mother Earth, and all her beautiful kingdoms that are all suffering for any reason that I have no control of. I grieve our freedoms due to the deceit, and heaven knows what's actually happening in the world right now, causing separation on so many levels. I'm sorry, I lost my place. I grieve walking outside and seeing everyone masked, especially the children. I even grieve the spider I vacuumed up by accident.
Yeah, that happens to me too. Yeah.
So for those of you that I'm not able to read out loud today, just know that I will make a point of reading them.
And we can share next time too, because we can save the chat. So, but let's do a couple more.
So next one, over 40 years ago, I grieved so much from the sudden loss of my cat that I didn't want to have another pet. I didn't have one until less than a year and a half ago, when I inherited a cat from my friend who died. However, I had to move, and the place I moved to was not conducive for my having that cat. I let someone else take him. And I just have to read this comment. OMG, this is the most productive therapy session I have ever had. Well, this is the power of witnessing.
I was just going to say, you're witnessing the power of sharing and part of all connected and dispersing some of our feelings so you don't have to hold it all in you. Yeah, this is great.
Another one. This has been an extraordinarily sacred healing space you've held today. I didn't know there were so many tears held within that had been waiting to be released. Thank you. And thank you to everyone here.
Thank you.
I'm going to skip to a couple more. Okay. This one is grief over knowing my mother wanted to hurt me and what I wanted or felt didn't matter. I used to get up late at night and steal sweets for comfort, even though I knew I would get punished in the morning. After she died when I was an adult, I reunited with some childhood friends who knew her. I was moved to share with them some of my childhood wounds, since they knew me when the abuse was happening, but no one wanted to hear. So often that happens, that the message that we give to other people is that it's what Masami said before, that I'm sorry for your loss, which is in effect slamming a door in someone's face in many cases. And we don't have to do anything when somebody is sharing their grief and loss. We can just listen. And that's what we've done here today. And I, again, want to thank all of you for your thoughts. It looks like I might have skipped a couple trying to get to the bottom of my list, but it looks like we actually got through most of those messages that were shared. And if I missed yours, I apologize.
Well, and this is a totally maybe different, but it's good. Ellen had a finger that was having some issues from not able to write and all that. And then I mentioned to get a zinc, and she feels better. She says, my finger healed. So that's good. Yeah. If you have any kind of like tendon issues and, ligament issues, zinc is a really good one to take a look at. So I'm glad. And, as we're wrapping up for today, I would love for all of you to just, obviously after this call, you've got to go ground yourself and release so that you don't carry this with you, because this was just a sharing and we were witnessing. Imagine we have like a beautiful campfire and we're all gathered up, and then little village, we all came together when we were able to share, and no comment necessary. No, I'm sorry for your loss, or no, like, oh, you know what? You should do this. Like, you should sign up for this grief, writing course, and you're going to do so much better. This was great for me. It's like, for some people, that doesn't work. So this is not the time to say you should do this and then you'll feel better. And we didn't have to do any of that, because that's not what this is about. And at the same time today, at the end of the day, I want you to think about who you have become because of that grief. Who have you become? What have you been able to add to your identity that is besides a mother, a daughter, a son, the father, the brother, maybe a CEO, maybe a healer. You may have a lot of different names for it. Teacher, I wrote it down, some like a learner. I'm a middle child, I'm a friend. But maybe because of what you shared and what you heard, you recognize that, oh, I'm also that because of what I've been through and because of my grieving process. And acknowledge that too. That's very important that you do. And I know that because of my grief and because of my losses, I've never publicly said this, but because I've always thought that everyone is their own healer. But I know that I'm a healer because I know how to grieve. So that's one thing I'm going to add to my list of who I am, is I'm a healer. Yeah.
I want to just read this Helen Keller quote that I came across. She says, and I just heard something about her on the radio today driving to my office, and she was such a powerful person. And those of you who may not know who Helen Keller was, she lost her ability to speak, to hear, and to see just before she was 2 years old. So just as she was learning how to speak, she was struck by a virus that made her blind, deaf, and mute, and was basically just trapped in darkness for years until she found a miraculous teacher who helped to bring her out. And she ended up being a very transformative figure for so many people. But she says, "We bereaved are not alone. We belong to the largest company in all the world, the company of those who have known suffering." And I just wanted to say to those of you that have mentioned this, I think it's Sarah Elizabeth saying this, but if only we were around a campfire. Well, we are kind of around a campfire, and it spreads out over many countries and time zones. And just know that you're not alone, and that you have a circle of people that are doing the same kinds of things as you in all these different countries, all these different time zones, different languages. And what we can do is just remember each other, remember ourselves, remember our own pains and how we can take care of ourselves to move through them. So I want to just suggest maybe that we close out on a quiet holding time. So why don't we all just come together and imagine that we are physically at the campfire, even though we're virtually gathered here. And I just want you to imagine the wonder of those flames. If you can picture yourself at a campfire and being surrounded in a circle of other people that are sharing that experience with you. And like so many other humans for countless generations and millennia before our time now, all of the toils and sufferings and griefs that they experienced and survived for us to be here. Just imagine how far back that campfire goes, that all of humanity has shared in. And for me, this is a reminder again, you are not alone. Whatever your experience is on this earth that's uniquely yours, you're not alone in having that experience. So thank you all for...
Chris?
Yeah.
Could you grab my bell behind you and ring it 3 times for us, and 1 for the past and our ancestors, and 1 for the future of grieving that will happen, and then for the current will be the 3rd one.
Okay. So I'll hold this up so everyone can see it on the screen first. So just feel this reverberation as the bell rings. So I'll do it 3 times.
Namaste, everyone. to our hearts to yours, and your hearts to us, ours. Thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being so courageous to love, so that you can experience life fully. And not experiencing life fully means grieving too. But I bow deeply to your courageous love. Namaste, and namaste.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you. We'll see you next Monday. Much love.
Love you, Masami.
Love you.